India, and live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. I'm Tanvi Taneja. We'll get you top stories from India and the region, and for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in Washington DC, Nick Harper. Good evening from Delhi, Nick.
Hi there, Tanvi. It's 9 a.m. here in Washington, D.C. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, Americans are casting their votes in Super Tuesday. We'll be live with our correspondent. And the EU bolsters its defences, eyeing the long game with Russia. But first, the headlines.
China resolutely opposes Taiwan's independence as it raises defense spending by 7.2% this year. Japan says China's rapidly expanding military a serious concern. States set for Super Tuesday, with 15 states, including powerhouses like California and Texas, heading to polls for presidential primaries. Ceasefire talks extended for another day in Cairo after 2 days with no breakthrough as the Ramadan deadline looms. And India asks South Korea to join Solar Alliance Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative as External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar discusses the special strategic partnership with Prime Minister of South Korea Han Duck-soo in Seoul. Up first, news from Asia. China plans to raise its defense spending by 7.2% this year, marking a continued surge in military budget growth during Xi Jinping's tenure. This increase, consistent with last year's rate, exceeds the projected economic growth, which is 5% for 2024. Further, China has toughened its stance on Taiwan, dropping the mention of peaceful reunification from Premier Li Keqiang's government work report at the National People's Congress. The work report also mentions about China's long-term plans to support prosperity and stability in Hong Kong and Macau, and resolutely opposes Taiwan's independence, separatist activities, and external interference on Taiwan. As we told you, China plans to raise its defense spending by 7.2% to $230 billion this year, marking a continued surge in military budget growth during President Xi Jinping's tenure. Chinese Premier, in his address, said that China is intending to bolster its military over the next decade and is aiming to be prepared to win a war.
We will adhere to implementation of the Chinese Communist Party's overall policy for the new era on resolving the Taiwan question, stay committed to the One China principle and the 1992 consensus, and resolutely oppose separatist activities aimed at Taiwan independence and external interference. We will promote peaceful development of cross-strait relations and be firm in advancing the cause of China's reunification. By deepening integrated cross-strait development, we will improve the well-being of the compatriots on both sides of Taiwan Strait so that, together, we can realize the glorious cause of national rejuvenation.
Meanwhile, Japan has expressed its concern over possible threat posed by China's rapid military expansion. Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi called China's military expansion a serious concern for Japan and the international community.
China's military trends are a matter of serious concern to Japan and the international community. This marked the greatest strategic challenge to date in ensuring the peace and stability of Japan and the international community, and in strengthening the international order based on the rule of law. I believe we should respond by leveraging our comprehensive national strength and cooperation with our allies and like-minded countries.
The Philippines has alleged that China's Coast Guard engaged in risky maneuvers, resulting in a collision between the Philippine Coast Guard ship and a Chinese vessel during a resupply mission for Philippine troops in the South China Sea. China's Coast Guard responded to the allegations, saying that it took professional and restrained, reasonable and lawful actions against the Philippine vessels that unlawfully entered waters near the Second Thomas Shoal, a contested atoll in the South China Sea.
The Chinese Coast Guard took necessary controlled measures against the Philippine vessels in accordance with the law, and the on-site operation was professional and restrained, reasonable and lawful. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has lodged solemn representations with the Philippine side and expressed strong protest.
On to the US now. Well, it's Super Tuesday in the States, which is a grand day in America when presidential campaigns reach their crescendo as both Republicans and Democrats hold nominating contests. And this time, Super Tuesday is happening in 15 American states. My colleague Nick Harper is in Washington, D.C. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Nick, what can we expect on Super Tuesday?
Well, plenty, Tanvi. Certainly a busy day ahead here in the United States. It is a pivotal day, with 15 states, including powerhouses like California and Texas, heading to the polls for presidential primaries. Voters in Virginia and North Carolina were among the first to cast their ballots in the presidential primaries as the polls opened nationwide. With more than a third of delegates at stake, Super Tuesday marks the largest day of primaries in the 2024 presidential cycle. Well, DD India's Benji Hire is joining us live from a rather wet and windy Virginia polling station. Benji, these results seem somewhat baked in. Is there any stopping Donald Trump on the Republican side?
Good morning, Nick. Well, if polls and precedents are anything to go by, this will be Donald Trump's day. He is by far and away the front runner to be the candidate for the Republican Party to take on Joe Biden in November's general election. He's in pole position on a rocket, he says, to clinch the nomination, having won all but one of the contests so far as part of this primary season. And today, on Tuesday, Super Tuesday, as it's known, he's on course to win all 15 states on the ballot, which would create perhaps an insurmountable lead over his rival for the nomination, Nikki Haley. For the former South Carolina governor, for the former US ambassador to the United Nations, this is probably her last chance to try to impede Trump's momentum. And her best shot is likely here. We're in the state of Virginia, not far from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., where Republican voters are traditionally more moderate, therefore perhaps more agreeable to Nikki Haley's political position. And critically, it's an open primary. What do I mean by that? The people who you might see walking into the building behind me are not only Republican Party voters, but also potentially Democrat voters who can partake in that Republican Party contest and therefore may decide to vote in favour of Haley in order to try to deny a Donald Trump presidency.
And Benji, Nikki Haley is vowing to stay in the race for now. Even if she loses again today, as you say she is likely to, can she still clinch the nomination?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, Nick, because 24 hours ago it could have been a very different situation. The Supreme Court, the highest court in the land in the United States, was weighing up a case as to whether Donald Trump should be taken off the ballot in some states, barred for, as those states argue, his involvement in inciting an insurrection attempt following his 2020 election loss to Joe Biden. As it happens, predictably, the Supreme Court decided that he will remain on the ballot, but he still faces multiple criminal trials in relation to those alleged attempts to overturn the election. And polls suggest that if convicted, voters would be turned away from supporting him. And so Nikki Haley is perhaps clinging on the off off chance that Donald Trump is convicted prior to the November vote. But the reality is that voters, at least that we've seen not only here in Virginia but across the whole country, who are considering who to vote for, have been accepting of Donald Trump's messaging on a number of fronts and not really moved by those multiple criminal cases, charges and trials. The sort of rhetoric that he's been espousing even as far north as this state of Virginia on issues such as immigration have resonated with the sort of voters that we're going to see coming into the polling station behind me throughout the day.
Benji, thank you. That was Benji Hire joining us live from a polling station in the state of Virginia. Well, moving on to Europe now, and during his one-day visit, French President Emmanuel Macron met Czech President Petr Pavel and also spoke at a nuclear forum. The French president said it is time for Ukraine's allies to step up, stressing that now was not the time to be cautious.
We are certainly approaching a moment in our Europe where it will be appropriate not to be a coward. We never want to see the tragedies that come. We never want to see what is at stake. And I believe that our two countries are aware of what is happening in Europe, of the fact that war has returned to our soil, that powers that have become unstoppable are expanding the threat every day, attacking us more. And we'll have to live up to history and the courage it implies.
Germany's Defence Minister Boris Pistorius said on Tuesday that one of the participants on the military call on Ukraine had dialed in via a non-secure line and disciplinary measures were being looked into. The Defence Minister also said that Russia is trying to divide Germany and that it would take technical and organisational measures to ensure such an incident does not happen again. Pistorius further said trust in Germany as a NATO partner remains unbroken.
It's a mistake, a serious mistake, which was made here and which should not have happened. The secret discussed, as far as I am aware, are manageable. I would put it that way, but it's up to the lawyer to decide that. No matter what else come up, and I don't know if something even worse pops up, which right now I don't expect, but if that is not the case, I will not sacrifice my best officers for Putin's game, to make that very clear.
Putin spielen opfern, das sehr deutlich zu sagen.
The European Union on Tuesday adopted a defence industry strategy and a new defence investment programme in case of a drawn-out standoff with Russia. The new strategy is aimed at better sharing resources and supply chains among EU members, while smoothing out bottlenecks and providing more financing. EU industry chief Thierry Breton said the determining factor in the war in Ukraine had shifted from which side had the biggest weapon stocks to who has the capacity to produce more, and EU members need to maintain an industrial balance of power. Ceasefire negotiations between Hamas and the mediators in Cairo have been extended by another day after 2 days have passed with no breakthrough. Hamas presented its ceasefire agreement proposal to the mediators during 2 days of talks and is now aiming for a response from the Israelis, who have continued to stay away from the meetings. Meanwhile, the Israeli Defense Forces released a video showing destruction of Hamas tunnels. The IDF continued evacuating civilians from combat zones and says they captured several Hamas terrorists hiding among civilians. DD India's Sarah Coates sent this report from Tel Aviv.
We do know that there was no Israeli delegation sent to Cairo this time around because Hamas had reportedly been asked for a list of captives that were still alive. The group says it was unable to provide this list of captives simply because of the ongoing Israeli military campaign in Gaza, with Hamas saying it actually doesn't know which captives are still alive or not. So this is really one of the main sticking points here. Still no official comment from Israel, but look, at the same time, we do know that the War Cabinet member Benny Gantz, he is in Washington. This is certainly something that he is discussing with senior US officials. It doesn't seem as though it's dead and buried, this potential ceasefire and hostage negotiation at this hour, given that we haven't heard yet from the Israelis and that there's so much pressure on Israel by the United States to come to some sort of an agreement ahead of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which is expected to begin this Sunday, amid widespread fear that another front could open, that the tinderbox of Jerusalem could really explode, with these calls from Hamas, including from Ismail Haniyeh, for everyone in the West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem to march on the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound to really light things up over that holy month.
Tuesday issued an advisory to Indian nationals living in Israel, urging them to relocate to safe areas within the country. In a post on X, the Indian embassy in Israel said all Indian nationals in Israel, especially those working in or visiting border areas in the north and south, are advised to relocate to safe areas within Israel. The embassy remains in touch with the Israeli authorities to ensure the safety of all our nationals. The embassy also shared a hotline number of the Population and Immigration Authority of Israel. The advisory came a day after an Indian citizen was killed, while 2 others were injured in Israel. Meanwhile, India has strongly condemned the humanitarian crisis in Gaza that has deepened due to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Speaking at the United Nations General Assembly briefing on the crisis in Gaza, India's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ruchira Kamboj, reiterated India is committed to supporting a two-state solution. She also urged the scaling up of humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza immediately.
India has a long-standing and uncompromising position against terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. There can be no justification for terrorism and hostage-taking. As such, we demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. It is imperative that humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza be scaled up immediately in order to avert a further deterioration in the situation. We urge all parties to come together in this endeavor. India has provided humanitarian aid to the people of Palestine and will continue to do so. India is committed to support a two-state solution where the Palestinian people are able to live freely in an independent country within secure borders with due regard to the security needs of Israel.
Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Tanvi, throwing it back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Nick. We look forward to the results of Super Tuesday. Nick Harper joining us all from Washington, D.C. You're watching DD India Global, still to come on the show. Russia and China are considering putting a nuclear power unit on the moon in 2033-34, says the head of the Russia's space agency, Roscosmos. And in a daring display, Alan Robert, known as the French Spider-Man, scales Manila's GT Tower in solidarity with the Philippines' claims in the South China Sea.
Voice of a rising aspirational world. Stories of challenges, struggles and accomplishment. A world battling conflict, hunger and poverty. Embracing growth, development, science and technology. A voice of progress, a voice of unity. Watch Voice of the Global South with me, Akshay Dongre, only on DD India. Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja.
India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar is in Seoul on the first leg of his 4-day visit to South Korea and Japan. India's foreign minister pitched for South Korea to participate in India-led initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance, the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, among others. He also highlighted that India-Korea partnership is significant, but even more so when we consider its impact on the Indo-Pacific.
India-ROK partnership is significant, but even more so when we look at its impact on the Indo-Pacific. Now, why is it important that we work together? Part of the answer lies in the opportunities of the emerging world, especially those pertaining to new technologies. But some of it also refers to the stability and the predictability of the international economy as a whole.
Further, Dr. Jaishankar on Tuesday called on South Korean Prime Minister Han Duck-soo and discussed with him ways to further enhance bilateral ties. After concluding his visit to South Korea, Jaishankar will travel to Japan from 6th to 8th of March for the 16th India-Japan Foreign Ministers Dialogue. DD India, Chris Gilbert reports from Tokyo.
Well, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar beginning his East Asia visit this week with a flurry of meetings with high-level officials in South Korea, with the trade and defense chiefs with whom he said he shared a convergence of ideas. He is set to meet with members of the Indian community in South Korea. He is also to co-chair this year's joint commission meeting. There is to be some consolidation of values, interests and policies from the two countries. Officials saying they expect the full gamut of issues to be run, from trade to supply lines to education and to defense. President Yoon Suk-yeol is now in his third year as leader of South Korea. He is far more assertive, even hawkish, than his predecessor Moon Jae-in. So there may need to be some consolidation of how these two countries see the structure of geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific. There may be some shared values, particularly when it comes to Yoon Suk-yeol's attitude towards Chinese military assertiveness and maritime issues. There may be some dovetailing of interests there between India and South Korea, but all of this is yet to be fleshed out throughout Wednesday and into Thursday, when Dr. S. Jaishankar is now then visiting Tokyo to meet with counterparts here and consolidate that relationship here in Tokyo throughout the week. Chris Gilbert in Tokyo reporting for DD India.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Odisha, an eastern Indian state on the Bay of Bengal, on Tuesday. During his visit, the Prime Minister inaugurated and laid foundation stones of development projects worth over 19,600 crore rupees. These projects relate to sectors of oil and gas, railways, road transport and highways and atomic energy. The Prime Minister also flagged off several trains in the state on the occasion. Addressing the event, India's Prime Minister hailed his government's efforts for the development of states in eastern India, especially Odisha.
ओडिशा के संसाधन राज्य की औद्योगिक ताकत और बढ़ाएं, इसके लिए केंद्र सरकार यहां आधुनिक कनेक्टिविटी पर भी बल दे रही है। पिछले 10 वर्षों में इस दिशा में अभूतपूर्व काम हुआ है। बीते 10 वर्षों में हमने ओडिशा में करीब 3000 किलोमीटर के नेशनल हाईवे बनाए, रेलवे का बजट करीब 12 गुना बढ़ाया है।
India and France's Foreign Office consultation were held on Tuesday in New Delhi, co-chaired by India's Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra and his counterpart Anne-Marie Descotes. During the meeting, both sides undertook a comprehensive review of the progress made in various facets of bilateral cooperation, as outlined in the ambitious India-France Horizon 2047 roadmap adopted during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic visit to France last year. Haitian troops were seen conducting patrols close to Port-au-Prince's International Airport on Monday in response to reports of intense gunfire nearby. The soldiers were deployed near the Toussaint-Louverture International Airport following an encounter with armed gangs in the vicinity. Following a state of emergency and curfews triggered by a prison breakout and a gang leader's call for the Prime Minister's removal, concerns grew among Haitians in Miami about the escalating violence and persistent gang conflicts gripping their homeland.
It should be like that. Human beings should live in a peace, not in a crime like that. It's terrible. It hurts. It hurts all Haitian that lives over here. We're all diaspora. It hurts us. You know, it's really sad.
And now we take a look at other stories making news around the world. A recent study revealed Argentina's poverty rate surpassed 57% at the beginning of this year, reflecting the struggles of millions amid triple-digit inflation and a significant devaluation of the peso in December. Tesla's European gigafactory in Grünheide near Berlin ceased operations due to a power outage triggered by a fire at a nearby power pylon. German authorities are probing the matter. Local media published a letter purportedly from an organization called the Volcano Group that claimed responsibility for the incident. Bitcoin surged to a two-year peak, surpassing $68,600, nearing its all-time high as investment flows continue to pour into the leading cryptocurrency. With a 50% increase this year, US-listed Bitcoin funds have witnessed significant inflows, driving the cryptocurrency's upward trajectory. And Russia and China are considering putting a nuclear power unit on the moon around 2033 to 2035. Yuri Borisov, the head of Russia's space agency Roscosmos, said on Tuesday. He added that this could one day allow lunar settlements to be built. Alan Robert, famously known as the French Spider-Man, ascended Manila's towering GT Tower, advocating for the Philippines' territorial rights over the South China Sea islands. His fearless climb captured the attention of onlookers, causing quite a spectacle in the bustling financial district. Scaling the 217-meter structure without safety equipment, he reached the summit in a display of sheer courage. He was promptly arrested by the police after descending successfully. So that's all for this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvita Neja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.